This is Julian, and I'm actually leaving Helsinki right now on my way to Tallinn in Estonia. And what I thought I'd share with you today is a video that I just recorded actually with Tony Crabbe. Okay, he's the author of a book that I just recommended in the weekly book club. I'll put a link here below. Check it the fuck out. It's called Busy: How to Thrive in a World of Too Much. And we dive deep in some of the concepts that he talks about in this book. I'll put a link to some of his work here below as well. So let me know what you think of the video, comment here below, and enjoy. This is actually a book that was surprising to me just reading it, because in a lot of these books that say are business, self-help, leadership, so on and so forth, usually you have one general concept and the rest of the book just kind of fills up the pages around that concept. But with yours, what I loved is all the way through, there were all these different captivating ideas. Like, it was fresh and new, and it just wasn't repetitive. So absolutely loved it. And yeah, once again, if you haven't read it, check it out. And what I thought we could do in this video here is start off with a concept that I loved, and you mentioned this in the book, and that is being okay with trade-offs. You know, we keep trying to do everything. It's like that need, I must do this, 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 this. We hate missing out on things. It's like that fear of loss or even like of failure. It's like, oh, if we miss out, we failed. And yeah, if you could just expand a bit on that, and then we can kind of see where it goes from there, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. We have this astonishing fear of loss. Maybe it's fed by social media. Maybe it's fed by all the information that we get about the different choices, the different options we have. And there was that great book a few years ago, Paradox of Choice, about actually how more options isn't necessarily a good thing. Some people have called it fear of missing out. For myself, the way I think about it is, I once got an email from a friend of mine who said, "I've just taken up kite surfing." Now, 5 years ago, I'd never heard of kite surfing, and yet I almost felt a physical pain that I thought, what am I doing with my life that I'm not actually going kite surfing? And it really got me thinking about this whole thing. And the fact is, we can't do everything. And we can talk about it from a business perspective later on, but even from a personal perspective, that the more stuff we try and cram in, the less we actually spend focusing on any one thing, and therefore the less joy we get out of it. I often compare two stag do's. I went for 2 stag weekends quite close together a few years ago. One, we went to a lovely city in France. We had an agenda that was action-packed. We went for loads of different things. We even went to Monte Carlo, which is a nearby resort. Brilliant. We came out with tons of stories. Then another stag do I went to a couple of weeks later, we just went up to a mountain hut in Scotland with a big case of beer and a bunch of friends, and we talked and we walked. Which one was better? Unquestionably, the second one was better, because actually we had time to get to know each other. I made some new friends there, and I spent real good time with people that I knew already and known for years. The other one, we spent our whole time looking forward to the next thing rather than ever being present in the moment. One of the ways I think about this from a purely psychological perspective is the way I respond to a buffet table. I hate buffets, because what I do is I see chicken korma, I see beef Wellington, I see sweet and sour pork, and I think, I like chicken korma, I'll have some of that. I like beef Wellington, I'll have some of that. I like sweet and sour pork, I'll have some of that. And I end up with a plate that no self-respecting chef would ever serve me. And quite frankly, I'd send back to the kitchen if I ever got served it. And it's because I asked the wrong question. I asked whether or not I like beef Wellington. The answer is yes. Whether or not I like sweet and sour pork. The answer is yes. And actually, when we compare that to our lives or our business, there's very few things that our friends want us to do that we see in the media or whatever, or in work. There's very few tasks that actually the answer to the question whether or not it's a good thing to do is no. Most of them, the answer is yes. Whether or not I want to kite surf, of course I want to kite surf. Whether or not I want to play golf, of course I want to play golf. Whether or not I want to spend time playing Lego with my son, of course I want to do that. The simple fact is, I can't do them all. And one of the things that they found both in a business context and also in a work context is that's not the right question. The right question is which. Which of the options available to me is the right one? So when I look at those tape, which do I prefer on that moment? Which will give me the better joy? Which was more related to my values? And actually that takes me closer to a better choice. The problem is that's a much harder decision. And when we're really busy and we get caught up in something called ego depletion, which is just, we're tired, our brains get just get worn out from making decisions all day, it makes it less likely that we're going to make the hard choice of which, and much more likely we're going to make the easy choice. So actually, the more busy we are, the more we tend to choose more. So the thing becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. We place failure in the wrong place. Because the thing is, the immediate failure we feel from not doing kite surfing is more relevant to us. We feel it more than the failure we will feel in 5 years' time from never really spending enough time with our children, for the sake of argument. So the really big stuff in our lives, the stuff that really produces joy and really nourishes us in the long term, those things on a given day, do I go to bed and think, or is there ever a situation where I'm thinking, oh, you know, I've really urgently got to play football with my son, for the sake of argument. There's lots of other things that are urgent, but that isn't. And so the immediate sense of failure from not doing the urgent stuff drowns out the stuff that's going to make a real difference. But as a result, by not failing to do everything, by you know, not accepting failure for all the million and one things, we actually fail on the really big stuff. I often say by trying to do everything, we actually achieve nothing. Yeah. Nothing of any real importance.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And I noticed that even personally with myself in business. One of the things I've been working on for years, and I still am in a way now, is delegating. And that was big, where I just couldn't. I'm like, oh, I can't give it to someone else. It's like, there was, again, that sense of failure, or if I give it, someone will do it, you know, they won't do it as well as I would. I just wouldn't even like the finished product as much because I didn't do it all. And it's exactly as you mentioned, like, sure, I could try to do it all, but it'll keep me at a lower level. And if you want to grow, if you want to do something big, again, accomplish something, you have to get in the habit of just be willing to sacrifice, be willing to be okay with the trade-off.
Yeah. And I talk to people sometimes about being strategically sloppy. And actually, the fact that one of the fears that we have is we'll drop the ball somehow, that we'll turn up to a meeting unprepared, that as you say, that the end result won't be quite as good as you could have produced it. So we have all these fears, these catastrophic fears of stuff. But actually, the more we kind of flurry around doing those, and that stops us from doing things like delegating or making tough choices, the more we actually end up not doing the stuff that we should be doing. And it's just fessing up to the fact that we do have fears. You know, we have lots of fears about stuff, but actually, you know what? That's leadership. Leadership is actually making tough choices. There was a great documentary years ago on Ryanair, a cheap airline in Europe, where they had loads of horror stories about customer service. I mean, terrible thing. People being stranded in Bratislava, no disrespect to Bratislava, but, you know, and miles away from the airport. And at the end of it, they went to Michael O'Leary and said, what do you make of this terrible customer service that we found out? And he just turned around and said, well, I don't do customer service, I do cheap flights. And the best customer service I can provide is really, really cheap flights for people that want cheap flights. And actually, there's such insight there that he recognized the more people he employed to do customer service, the more expensive he was going to have to make his flights. And so he made a tough trade-off, and they've been terrifically successful. You know, and Tim Cook at Apple talks about they're the most focused company because every day they say no to great ideas in order to put enormous energy behind the ones that we choose. And the more ones we choose, the less energy we can put into any one of them. Yeah. And at the end of the day, in an attention economy that we're in, where we're surrounded by so many voices, so many things, so many opportunities, so much information, what do we notice? We don't notice the regular. We don't notice the sensible. We don't notice the person who's doing the hard work. We notice people who are differentiated, people that stand out, people that are doing things differently. And all that comes from doing less with more thought, more imagination. And you can't do that if you don't have the courage, if you like, to delegate.
Yeah. So what would you recommend in terms of practicing sloppiness? Because it is, getting rid of that I must be perfect. I remember, you mentioned in the book, like small tasks, like checking your emails, like getting rid of like 20 unread emails. It's like it must be perfect in all fields. What are some things you'd recommend doing there?
Well, I think we can play with it. We can be a bit playful about the whole thing, and rather than set yourself a goal around getting to zero. I mean, I get horrified about how many. If you type in "getting to zero," you know, and you see how many blogs there are on getting to zero, as if that's a worthwhile task.
Oh yeah.
So
people even get upset when they see my phone, and they're like, "Can I just do it for you? Can I do it for?" Like they need to get to that zero. It's hilarious. Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? So you might play a game about trying to beat your record of how many unopened emails you got each day. You might just see how long you can last without going for your first fix of email. I often ask how long it takes people to reach for their first fix of email each day. So you might say, okay, I lasted half an hour now. How long can I last? I mean, I've got an executive I'm working with at the moment, and he's detoxing from his smartphone at the moment. So he's deliberately leaving his smartphone on his desk. So when he goes to meetings, he hasn't got it with him. So he can be present.
Yeah.
And you know what? He's hating it, but the organization is loving it as he just starts to readjust to the fact that, you know what, the world will have to live without him for half an hour. And I think it's, you know, I chatted to an executive who said, look, my thing is I have to feel like I'm the best prepared person in every meeting. Now, my question back to them was, at what cost? So what are you doing? What are you not doing because you're putting that level of preparation into every single meeting, whether it matters or not? And it's just being choiceful about stuff. And then, and one of the things I talk about myself is, so I once had a client who was getting a bit irritated that I wasn't responding real time to email. Mm. And there's a big thing that actually, I mean, Ellen Langer did some great research where she found the magic of the word because, that just following a request with the word because, I think increases the number of people that say yes to our request or respond positively to it by 50%, because there's a reason behind it. And actually, I noticed this guy was getting slightly irritated that I wasn't responding quickly to email. So I just picked up the phone and said, let me just explain why I'm not responding quickly. I'm not responding quickly because I switch off my email for most of the day to allow me to think, to create, to focus on the work that I'm doing. And instead of being irritated, once he had my why, once he understood my reason, he responded totally different to me. He ended up being slightly inspired and got me in to do some work. But which is always a good thing as a consultant, obviously. But the point is, it's kind of we're all struggling with too much. Mm-hmm. So those people that stand out and say, look, my values are this, so I'm making some choices, and that will mean that I'm not going to come to that meeting, or that will mean that I may be underprepared there, or that will, you know, when we're able to explain that and articulate the big reason behind it, not only do people accept it, people actually are slightly in awe of that kind of ability to make those tough choices and be clear enough in your thinking. And but we have to be able to explain that why. Yeah,
I love that. I like too. It's like at what cost, that question, because we were talking about trade-offs, and it's like being okay with trade-offs. But in reality, trade-offs are happening all the time, but we're just not aware of them. It's like we think we're doing it all, but hey, be aware of the trade-offs and then pick the ones that are beneficial to you. What I would say too is building on this detoxing, say from the cell phone. If we could expand on that, just in terms of, you know, society in and of itself. Like one thing that I really talk about is the difference between external stimulus and internal fulfillment. And, you know, massive generalization, those are two sources of joy or bliss. And external stimulus is, again, the busy, the more, you know, a good reaction, popularity, a drink, drugs, whatever it is. And it's like this dirty, temporary, fleeting high. And that's what we're conditioned to. So detoxing, it's like we're going to need that fix. But then once we're finally able to get in touch again with the more subtle, say, internal fulfillment, the stuff that really matters, that feeling you get, as you mentioned in the book, when you get really engaged in a process for a longer period of time, that's like the long-lasting happiness. So when I read that, I absolutely loved it. If we could, touch on that angle there.
Yeah, so, I mean, one level, I separate it into inputs and outputs. So we have inputs, to your point, the external stimulus, the stuff that's hitting us, and we have outputs, which are the things we choose to do. And when we allow inputs, whether it's external stimulus and, you know, from the phone, or whether it's tasks coming at us to set our agenda, rather than the stuff that we choose to do setting our agenda, then we end up dissipating all our energy, we move away from purpose, we end up just being reactive. I normally say the opposite of busyness and furious kind of engagement in activity is focused attention. But there is a third state, which I think is equally important, which is inactivity, which is being alone with your mind. Now, actually, the research shows for a lot of us, that's not necessarily a happy place, because we've got fears, we've got worries, and when we're there, we ruminate. But that misses the point in my thing. I think it's really important that we're a generation that has spent less time alone with ourselves, alone with our thoughts, than any other generation that's ever lived. And so, because we can stimulate ourselves so much, and so we don't do the work that we need to do to find our purpose, to find our authentic self, to find what's really important to us. And so actually, our inner self becomes a more and more barren place, as opposed to reaching something like Carl Jung would call a sort of self-actualized self.
Yeah, with the dopamine hits too, it's like we get it when we have an email, but also when we don't. It's like you look and there's no email. It's like, it's like you still get your fix.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
the world doesn't love me.
I know, it's like no matter, every time you check. Yeah, no, one thing I actually did, because it's true, you have to get lost in that engagement of deep focus, but not coming from a place of either running away from something either. It's like, oh my God, I can't be left alone with my mind. Let's do something. There's this thing called a sensory deprivation tank. I don't know if you ever checked that out. I did that for the first time, where I scheduled 2 hours, and you lie in this tank where it's not water. It's like this liquid that matches your body temperature. So you're floating.
Oh, yeah.
You don't feel anything. You can't see anything. It's pitch black. You can't, say anything. You're just lying there. And at first it's cool. Like a few minutes in, you're like, oh, this is interesting. Then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to meditate a bit, I guess, clear my mind. And after 15 minutes, until the 2 hours are over, it's a living hell. You're just like, oh my, like you see where your mind goes and your thoughts. You're like, I need the stimulus. How much longer? It's ridiculous. So that's something I actually recommend people. It's like, do that once and just be aware. Because, yeah, as you mentioned, we don't have any downtime and you have no idea, like, who you are with yourself. Like, or how, in a way, sometimes too, just negative we are with ourselves as well. Just self-attacking, blaming ourselves, like, oh, you're lazy, you're not doing anything, etc., etc. Yeah.
And there's a great, if you find yourself getting too much into self-attacking when you're in that space, there's a great little technique is to change to the third person. So the voice inside your head, if you find yourself saying, I'm stupid, I'm rubbish, I'm going to fail at this presentation, then actually, if all you do is reframe that into third person, so you say, Tony, you got this presentation, have you done this before? And you change the voice and you put Tony in, what you'll find is that the voice becomes more constructive. Somehow, getting it into third person, it's an incredibly simple technique, but actually, that voice that's terribly harsh and shrieking tends to become a little bit more pleasant, or at least less negative.
Yeah, we would never talk to someone else the way we talk to ourselves like that. Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, what I would build on too is nowadays too with business and say social media. What are some thoughts or say tips? You mentioned in the book like scheduling a time to like check the email because it's easy to rationalize. Well, okay, I'm checking my email. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, so on and so forth. But that's my job. That's where I get my leads from. And then even though a lot of that time is spent, just being in that buzz of busy, it's easier to come up with that excuse like that is the important thing. If you have any thoughts on that or tips on, say, scheduling times to do so.
Yeah. So, look, you can't ignore this stuff. And for myself as well, I find Twitter an incredible research tool. So it's not that and I'm not anti-email. I actually think email is one of the best inventions that's ever happened, because if you think about the possibilities that email provides, it allows people to get in touch with me at a time of their choosing when it's convenient for them, and me to respond to them at a time that's convenient for me.
Yeah.
So theoretically, email should mean I am less distracted. Of course, we don't use it that way. We use it as a real-time communication vehicle, and that's where all the problem lies. So if we actually say, you know what, at certain times in the day, at the times of my choosing, so for me that would often be sort of late morning and then mid-afternoon and then possibly at the end of the day, whatever. I'll blast my email and I'll really go, I'll open it up and I'll go hell for leather in it. You then know you can then relax in the rest of the day and you're still responding. I mean, but you're just not responding real time. And the reality is, people say, yeah, but I've got to be really responsive to things like email. The reality is we always have times in our day where we're not available for whatever reason. We might be in a crucial meeting. We might be on a flight. We might be on a, there are always times when we're not available. So, the world will survive without us for a short while. So I think it's about, and for me, what I tend to do is I make responding to email into a flow producing activity by setting myself a challenge. I open up and see how many email I've got. I look at the clock and I give myself a target for how quickly I'll get through those emails.
Yeah.
And then and there's actually a lot of research that shows when we're aware of the clock, we actually do more work in a short space of time. As long as it's mindless work, it's really bad for creativity and imagination. But for mindless stuff, like off email can sometimes be, it can be a good productivity enhancer. It's a bit like how much work we get through on the last day before our holiday. So that's, I think it's important to schedule those times. Because again, it allows us to relax as well. It isn't just a practical thing, but we can procrastinate those things and put them off to later and then allow us to focus.
Yeah, I do that. What I personally do is I try to schedule them beforehand. Like, say I'm going to tweet something or post something on Facebook, you can actually schedule in the time. So it's like, okay, 1 hour, this one, this one, this one. And of course, as you mentioned, like, give yourself a deadline, because if you don't, the whole day will be gone, or like hours will be gone. You'll just log in, it's like, I'm just going to post this one thing, and then there's this and this and this and this and this. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly on Twitter, I would never try and do it every day. I choose a chunk of time on one particular afternoon, often when I'm, a bit more tired or whatever, and then I'll spend 2 or 3 hours on it and just schedule them for the next couple of weeks. Yeah. And then I can forget about it. So, responding to a Twitter real time is just a terrible thing, but that allows me to keep the messages going out there, but actually doing it in a focused chunk of time.
Yeah, perfect. The last thing I just thought we could touch on is how you mentioned this applies to friendships or even relationships. We tend to think busy in terms of tasks or business, but I thought this was super interesting as well. If you could just touch on some of the big points there.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you touched on it earlier a little bit, in that we're more connected but more alone than we've ever been. So we have more connections but fewer real friends. So there was some really interesting research in 1985, for example, that found that 59% of people had 3 or more very close confidants. When they did the study again in 2004, the most common number of confidants was 0. And there's a steady decline in how many people can actually feel they can turn to someone and talk about their problems and share their concerns with the world. There's actually other research that showed the value of a close friend who you see regularly is worth about $100,000 a year on your quality of life, if you like. Now, Tim Cassidy did some great research where he differentiated between popularity and affinity. So people that strive to be popular versus people that try and build close relationships. And what he found is the people that push for popularity end up being much less happy, more depressed, more anxious, more lonely. And people that push for really building on the close friends live longer, are happier, better mental health, take drugs less, all the rest of it. And I apply that to some work done by Robin Dunbar, where he looked at, you probably heard of the Dunbar's number, which is the number of people anyone can know is 150. Mm-hmm. But he actually structured the different strength of relationships into different tiers. And he found that we tend to have 5 closest people, and then 15, and then 50, and then 150, all of differing levels of closeness. Now, I think, actually, and one of the things I often work with people on is just say, it's the 15 closest to us where all the juice comes out of life. So we know that close relationships increase longevity, are probably the biggest cause of happiness that we can have in our lives. So the happiness researchers will fundamentally say, if you want to be happy, spend more time with people that you love, and full stop. And that will solve most of the world's problems when it comes to happiness. Now, but it's not from the 150 or 500 Facebook friends, it's from those 15. And actually, the interesting parallel research is where they found actually heavy Facebook usage is associated with more loneliness. Now, they don't find Facebook makes you lonely. What they find is lonely people tend to use Facebook as a sort of, as a supplement, somehow to try and fill the gap. But the reality is, real relationships are messy, tricky, and awkward. It's a very close parallel to the whole busy thing. It's easy to procrastinate from doing real work by messing around with email and really putting off the hard stuff. We can procrastinate from making relationships by actually messing around on social media. Now, social media is fabulous. Who hasn't felt the joy of connecting to an old school friend from 20 years ago? Because what would you say if you picked up the phone to them? You'd have nothing to say to them. Mm-hmm. But somehow you become part of their life again in a nice, easy way. Social media is fabulous, but it's not a replacement. And I think that's the thing. The joy and the health benefits and the psychological benefits don't come from 500, they come from 15.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. A supplement, like an extra tool, but not, the foundation. Because that too, it's like with social media now, it fills even our needs to socialize. Like in the past, say before the internet, or even me when I was, like a kid, you're by yourself at home, you have that need to socialize, there's nothing to do, you get out of the house. Nowadays, you can just log into Facebook. Even in terms of a purpose, you can play a video game where it's like you level up, you make all these alliances, like it virtually fills all your needs. And with the internet too, you have that endless supply of movies, TV shows, you can literally drown yourself in it. So, yeah, it's interesting.
That's true. And there is some research that shows that that actually the average psychological state of people watching TV, for example, is mildly depressed. But they're also finding similar findings for Facebook and for social media. And it's because that sense of, I've just not achieved anything. People think and anticipate it's going to be a really pleasurable activity, and they come off. And it's not just because of all the showing off of people's lives and all the amazing things, and that makes you feel like, what am I doing with my life? It's not just that. I think it's actually this sense of, I've sort of just wasted stuff there. Whereas that's a completely different feeling we get, to your point, if we get out and go and get on our bike and go and find a friend down the road.
Yeah.
There's it's just a different level of experience.
Yeah, and it's like this downward cycle after that. And it doesn't even rest you really. Like we think, just watching a show, watching a movie will relax us. When in reality, it's, as you mentioned in the book, that full downtime, like that full disconnect from everything else. Like just even 10 to 20 minutes of just sitting by yourself is way more relaxing and energizing than, say, an hour or two of television or surfing the web. Yeah.
Yeah. We seldom really, really savor TV or savor social media in the way that we might savor a hot bath, or we might savor a meal with a good friend, or whatever the case may be. We often just consume it. Now, there are some amazing programs that you completely savor, that you look forward to, that you hang on every word, but that's not the majority of TV. There are also amazing experiences beyond social media, but that's not the majority of social media. So it's just being aware of how we use it and not just using it as a substitute, as a quick fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just lastly, in terms of snapping out of it, what are some of the small steps you'd recommend someone, say, should take to slowly, stop being so addicted to, say, their phones, to the dopamine hits, et cetera, and actually get more in touch with that internal fulfillment, that deep engagement, or that savoring of a moment? When
it comes to the relationship piece, it's difficult to tell anyone. It's a bit like saying, don't think of a white elephant. We all think of a white elephant. So saying, I'm not going to do social media, you're guaranteed you're going to crave for social media. So I get people just to put much more focus on their 15 and just really plan what they're going to do with those 15, whether it's date nights, whether it's whatever. What are you going to build into your agenda that actually, that will then encourage you to spend time? And we used to do a painting evening, and we had some close friends come over and we'd paint every night. I'm a terrible painter, by the way. But anyway, I was playing with it. And almost every time on a Thursday night when we did this, either my wife or I would have a conversation about an hour before saying, should we cancel? Because it felt like hard work. And equally, every time, we loved it. So it's just committing to things that are going to create those moments and spend the time. And then that gives you less time for social media. Allow social media to fill in some of the gaps, but create and prioritize time for the 15. When it comes to the savoring, and the focusing. I think one thing is just use the off button. I mean, there's a little piece of research that I love where if you just put the phone on the table in front of, when you're in a cafe, you put the phone on the table, the other person likes you less because they're aware you're slightly distracted. So I mean, I think we can all learn a lot by just actually taking back control over the technology and just switching it off every now and then. And then there's a bunch of techniques when it comes to getting into flow and really immersing that we can learn. So my father-in-law has this great technique which is called a happy attack, where for savoring, where he'll just, one of the concepts about how do we get better at savoring is sharing moments. So in the middle of a random moment, whether it's a dinner or whatever, he'll just call out, I'm having a happy attack. Now, the first time you hear that, it sounds rather strange, but actually it's a great technique because what he's doing is acknowledging that he's in joy at that moment. He's completely immersed in what he's doing. He's completely loving it, which then makes everyone around the table think, oh, maybe this is a good time. And then we all start joining him in that moment. And just that habit of kind of noticing great moments make us reach less for the facile stimulation of technology, if you like. Or just how do you bring real focus into moments? So there's, I think there's practices that we can do, whether it's mindfulness or whether it's just how do we identify activities in our day and then say, right, what aspect of that activity am I going to particularly focus on in order to savor it? So, it might be when you think of a meal, when you have a meal, you think, okay, what flavor am I particularly looking out for? How can I discern all the different herbs in this meal to really bring your attention to it rather than just chewing it and talking? So there's a lot of techniques we can use to bring ourselves into our 3-second window, which is, from a psychological sense, the present tense is 3 seconds long. So how do we bring all our attention into that moment?
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, thanks for doing this call. And once again, I'll put a link to your book here below. If you're watching this, check it out. Okay, it goes way more in depth. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend it. And as always, until next time.